This is an episode for the writer who keeps searching for the perfect structure. You have rewritten the same sections over and over. You've worked on flow. You've adjusted pacing. You've been rewriting and rewriting and rewriting, but you still don't feel finished. You still don't feel like you're ready to move on to the next stage. So this episode is for you, my friend. Let's get into it. I cannot tell you how many writers come to me wanting help with structuring their memoir. They want to know how to tell the story right. They tell me, okay, I've been following this specific format for telling the story. They are asking me about tension and pacing and flow, all of these narrative terms. They know enough to keep them in the rewriting cycle, but they don't know enough yet to snap them out of it. Because revisions and rewriting are a really important part of the process. Once you have that first draft, that really is only the beginning, right? Your memoir will likely go through many iterations. You are going to have a few different drafts. You are going to rewrite. You are going to revise. Writing a memoir is a messy process that way. So I'm not trying to gaslight you into saying that this process doesn't have to be messy. But I do want to start to open your eyes to the possibility that you don't have to stay in the messy, that there actually is a more straightforward way out of the mess. And that way is going to look different for every single writer and every single memoir. To do that, you have to shift your mindset, your headspace, your focus. You need to shift that focus from trying to figure out the structure to developing clarity on your actual story. And I know that this feels like a backward step, and truly it is. I feel like this is kind of like phase 2 of memoir writing. That's where writers come to me thinking that this is where they need to direct their efforts. But really, there's a first phase in the writing process that these writers have skipped over, or they become misaligned with it. Spending your time trying to figure out the tension, the pacing, the flow, even different story beats. That's a term within the writing community that might be familiar to you. Obsessing over those has a place, it has a time, but it's not going to do you any good if you don't first know what your story is actually about. Because your memoir, one, it isn't about you, it's about your reader. So that's kind of one of the first shifts I want you to make. And I know that it's difficult. That's a difficult shift to make because you're like, well, of course it's about me. I'm writing about my life. And you're right. When you are writing a memoir, however, there is someone on the other side of that page. And that's who you need to think about the entire time that you're writing and revising. And if you are not clear on who that person is and what they need from your story, what your story can offer them, you are going to be stuck in rewrites forever. You will never quite feel things click if you don't have that clarity on the purpose of your memoir, on its message, what I call finding the thread. You're not going to have that if you don't have that first. All of the structure work that you could invest into the process is going to come up short. You will consistently feel that sense of stuckness. You will consistently feel that sense of overwhelm and that something is just off. And you feel that way because you don't actually have enough clarity on what your memoir is actually here to do. Because your story, while it has immense value to you just because it happened to you, that's true for every single person. When it comes to writing a memoir, your story is actually just the vehicle for a bigger message. And you need to figure out what that is. And you also need to figure out where that vehicle is going, i.e. the reader. You need to know who that is. And rewriting without that compass is going to lead to confusion, to continual confusion, not clarity. So that's one of the biggest shifts I want you to make in this episode. And it's one of the biggest shifts that I work with my writers one-on-one is we need to shift that focus. They come to me saying, hey, let's dive into the structure. And I tell them, okay, we'll get there. But first, we need to figure out this first phase. We need to figure out clarity. We need to really dial into what you're writing, who you're writing for, and why they're going to care about it. If you've listened to this podcast for very long, my reiteration of that is going to sound very familiar. I talk about this concept all the time, and it's because it's the most foundational work of being a memoir author. This is the work that is going to set the stage for your entire career as a memoir writer. Truly, this is the work that not only carries your writing and your revisions, it also carries you through the marketing. It carries you through querying. If you go the traditional route, it carries you through self-publishing. If you go that route, it carries you through the entire publication timeline. Is this work in this first phase of memoir writing? And that's why I hammer down on this so often, because it is so crucial and it's often skipped. And it's often the stage that memoir writers skip or gloss over because you're not actually writing. You're not actually working in the words. And you think that that is the meat of the story, but it's not. The meat of your story is the message that you're here to say with it. And the writing will be easier. The revisions will be easier, more straightforward when you have that foundation in place. So if you are in the middle of writing, regardless of how much you have, maybe you're listening to this because you're like getting ready to dive into memoir writing. If so, fantastic. I advise you, if at all possible, to do this work first before you get into the actual writing. Some of that is dependent on your writing style and process, whether you are a plotter, that means someone who likes to plan out the writing, or a pantser, meaning you write by the seat of your pants. This work can be done regardless of how you write, but it does need to happen. So you need to figure out, what is your book actually about? That's usually the easiest thing for people to figure out. A memoir has a focus. Who is your ideal reader and why should they care? Those are the questions that are so simple for me to say on a podcast like this, but they are also sometimes the hardest to answer. It requires some real digging and discovering and pondering to really articulate those questions to a depth that will give you the clarity that you need to make the rest of your writing easier. Without clarity on those three pillars, what, who, why, you are going to be rearranging scenes over and over without any real direction, and you're not going to get anywhere. And worse, your reader isn't going to get anywhere with you either. So if this episode is hitting home, and I suspect that for many of you it is, I want you to evaluate if you've been focusing on structure without clarity. And if you have, first off, you're going to be fine. I know that this can be like, oh my gosh, I've been spending all of this time focusing on the wrong thing. Don't feel like you're behind. You don't need to feel like you're just messed it all up and you're doing it wrong. I work with writers at so many different stages in their drafting process, and I can apply this same foundational work. I can take them through this essential first phase of writing, regardless of how much they've already written. It's just a matter of how we apply it. But I do this all the time. I do this with my own writing. I am someone who likes to kind of plan things out before I write. So I did this work before I started my own memoir and essays, but doing so allowed me to make the most of every single writing session. And my writing sessions are pretty short. I'm in the season of life where I'm going a lot of places. I don't have large windows to write, but going through this first phase of memoir writing and really articulating the clarity behind my story and behind the message that I want these essays to carry, that has allowed me to write smarter, not harder. It's made the writing process so much easier for me. I'm going to be sharing more over the next few weeks on how to break out of this cycle of rewriting, because I see this happen a lot. And I understand why it happens. It's a process that's similar to kind of throwing spaghetti at the wall. Okay, maybe if I rearrange this, it's going to click. But we need to pause that rewriting circle. And I know that it's hard, but I want you to pause it. And I want you to step back and ask yourself, how clear am I actually? How much clarity do I actually have on what I'm writing and why my reader is going to care about it? I will link to a quiz in the show notes of this episode, because I drafted it's like a 6 or 7 question quiz that just helps you evaluate how much clarity you actually do have in your memoir. And it's just going to give you a baseline of how much you need to rework, how much clarity you really need to articulate. Some people do have kind of the elevator pitch ready, and even then there is refinement that we have behind that. So check out the link in the show notes and you can go take that quiz. It's completely free. And also stay tuned to the podcast, to my email list, because I have a resource that's coming in next month that is going to truly shift how you engage with your memoir writing. I'm talking about these different phases of writing. I'm really leaning into that this year in my content and in how I engage with writers and how I teach you a different way to write your story, because the way that you've been doing it can get you to a point. But again, so many writers skip that initial phase of writing that provides the clarity that they need to make the most of their structure. Right? So think of these as building blocks. You have clarity first, structure second. And the structure comes so much more easy once you have that phase one in place. And so I'm really excited for what I have coming down the pike for you. I've really been doing some refinements in how I teach these concepts, and it's going to be good. It's going to be really good, writers. So let me know on Instagram, in emails, how much clarity you actually do have. Were you surprised that you actually don't know as much about your story and what it's here to do as you thought? Again, this takes a lot of intention. It takes a lot of thought. And it's something that we gloss over because we're so excited to get into the actual writing. But more often than not, when I start work with a writer, we need to pause the structure, pause the rewriting, and go and do this clarity work first. And so I'm going to be talking a lot more about this over the next few weeks. I want you just to start shifting your mindset in this space and let me know how it goes. So this weekend, stop rewriting, focus on some clarity here, and I will see you next week.